Pat Becher from the Mohawk Valley Water Authority joining us right now. Pat, how are you?
Well, thanks. How you doing, Dave?
Doing okay.
Good. Nice to see you guys again.
Mark Wahlberg wanted to ask you a question, so he's hanging around just so he can have a press conference with you, Pat.
Mark and I have talked water on a number of occasions.
We have.
Can't wait to hear what he has.
This is there's a big controversy about whether people should use bottled water or water from the tap, from the city tap. And what I'd like to have you explain, and I know the answer because I've talked to you about this before, but I think it's fascinating. Who regulates, which agency regulates bottled water, and what are the regulations, and which agency regulates the water that comes through the pipe that you provide, and which agency regulates that, and what are the regulations?
Great question. Great question. Bottled water is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. We fall under regulations coming from both the State Health Department and the EPA at the federal level. And so the testing that we do is much more stringent. The requirements are much more stringent. And bottled water has relaxed standards compared to what we're serving with a public drinking supply. And it's interesting because, and I think I may have told you this once, Mark, but we did an experiment one time where we took about 12 brands of bottled water and put them under our high-powered electron microscope. Every one of those bottles had higher background levels of bacteria than our own drinking water.
Wow.
It was just background bacteria, nothing harmful.
Right.
But nevertheless, I mean, if you're immunocompromised, for example, perhaps that could be a problem. The last thing they typically do is take the chlorine out of the bottle, so it depends how long it's sitting on the shelf. But unless, you have a problem with your home plumbing, the water you're getting from our system or any well-run public system is going to be perfectly fine, and you really don't need to buy bottled water unless you just want to have portability and take it with you.
Now, I know there's a story about some local municipality with a flushing of the water system over the weekend, and I think it happens from time to time.
Sure.
And it causes maybe a discoloration in the water. Explain what the public thinks about that when they see that happen, and are there dangers involved?
Sure. Typically, flushing is done because there was a main break. We get breaks all the time. It's an old system, and the ground shifts. So occasionally, if the pressure has to drop to zero because we have to shut it off entirely in order to fix it, there's always the possibility that some groundwater could get into the pipe. So we flush it before we let water move back out through the system to customers. But in the meantime, when you get a break, the water accelerates and decelerates very rapidly as the break is flowing, and then we shut it off. And that can stir up a little bit of sediment that's in the bottom of the pipes that accumulates over the years. It's nothing harmful. It is
still potable then?
Yeah, it's disinfected. It just gets a little bit discolored with some of the sediment in the pipes. And typically when that happens, just wait a little while and then run your pipes and let it flow through. And try not to use your hot water so you don't get that stuff in your tank until it clears out.
Kind of going back to Mark's question, Pat, the idea of maybe contamination, and we've seen some lower water levels over the summer. Does that tend to more bacteria in the pipes as the water is lower coming through there?
You talk about water levels at the reservoir itself at Hinkley. No, it doesn't, because the water coming from Hinkley Reservoir goes into our treatment plant. And the only difficulty for us is as it gets very low is that the water in the reservoir itself is moving faster. So it stirs up a little bit of sediment off the bottom of the reservoir.
How about temperature? Does that?
Temperature doesn't really affect it all that much. But we disinfect it all the way through. It just makes the filtering a little bit tougher as the water level gets a little bit lower. But otherwise, the water is perfectly safe.
All right.
And fluoride is another interesting aspect of the city water versus the bottled water.
Yeah. We use fluoride in our water. Every dentist in town will tell you that you're better off with it than without it. But there is a pretty vocal group of people that are opposed to fluoride, and they cite a lot of data suggesting there's a link between fluoride and cancer. But the American Medical Association, the American Dental Association, a ton of research all suggests that at the levels that we're administering fluoride, it's perfectly safe, and there's a whopping dental benefit from it.
And talk about the dental benefit, because that's interesting. There are actually some studies not too far from here where they checked people who use city water versus people who use water that's not treated with fluoride.
Mark, we talked about that with Dr. Zena Berry from
Mm-hmm.
Ellenwood Dental recently on the show, and she said overwhelmingly that the teeth are healthier where there is fluoride provided, and where there's wells, maybe not so much.
Yeah, and you have to have tough tooth enamel, especially if you're going to be biting into those dangerous baby carrots and things like that.
That's right. Talking to Pat Becher from the Mohawk Valley Water Authority, also considering a 2% hike here. Explain about that.
We're proposing a water rate increase for the next fiscal year, which starts January 1. And it is 2%, which we think is about as modest as we could get it down to. For the average customer, it's about $7 a year, maybe 60 cents a month, something like that. But it's necessary because, like everybody else, our costs go up, and we're seeing some things jump. We had a lot of water main breaks last winter because it was so cold for so long. And so our paving costs to restore the streets went up somewhat. Our workers' compensation is going up somewhat. And it's also a factor of overall system use actually declining a little bit. And that's a tough thing for people to understand. They say, well, we're using less water, so we have to pay more. And the fact is that, unfortunately, the vast majority of our expenses are fixed costs. Mm-hmm. And so even though water use goes down, our operating cost really doesn't go on other than a little bit of less chemical use at the treatment plant and maybe a little bit less electricity. And it's kind of like the road system. You know, I make the analogy, in the 1990s, Oneida County lost 11% of its population. But that didn't make it really cheaper to plow the streets when it snows or to fix potholes or anything like that.
Sure, sure. Now, when you say it's a proposed hike,
right.
What are the nuts and bolts of that, and what takes place to make it come to fruition?
We are required every year to hold a public hearing on water rates. It's in our legislation, and that hearing is going to be today at 5 o'clock. We announced it last week. In case you didn't see it elsewhere, I'm glad we're on to talk about it this morning.
Sure.
At City Hall today.
At City Hall at 5 o'clock, right on the first floor in the Common Council chambers, will be the public hearing required on a rate increase. And I and our controller will be explaining a little bit about our budget and why the rate increase is necessary. I'm also going to talk a little bit about a bond issue that we're doing right now. We're going to be refinancing some prior series bonds for some savings and also borrowing for some new construction for projects moving forward.
So there is some bond and borrowing taking place?
Yeah, that's going on right now as well. We hope to close on the bonds by the end of this week. And by refinancing some earlier bonds because the interest rates are low, we're actually going to save about $1.8 million over the life of that debt and generate savings in our annual budget of about $130,000 a year. So we do look for ways to cut our costs whenever we can.
Pat, when we pay the water bill, there's an assumption that whatever water you bring in is going back out into the sewer system.
Right.
Now, there's a way that if a homeowner is not going to be putting the water back into the sewer system, they can get their bill changed. For example, if you're going to fill up a swimming pool,
right,
that water is not going back into the sewer system.
And that's generally the main exception that I'm aware of.
What do people do if they're in that situation and say, listen, I'm going to be using a lot of water to water my lawn, or I'm going to wash a bunch of cars, or I've got to fill my swimming pool. Right. What do they do to get that reduction on their bill?
The lawn watering, frankly, I'm not sure that the county will forgive those charges. But if you are going to fill a pool, and customers will call us, I'm filling my swimming pool, what should I do? And we advise them to contact Oneida County Sewer Agency, and sometimes they will then waive that charge and take that quantity of water for the pool off the bill and then notify us to remove those charges.
All right. So once again, that hearing tonight at 5 o'clock downtown, open to the public. People can ask questions. And
yep, absolutely. And I'll be explaining our budget, the proposed rate increase, and then we take comments from the public. And the board will consider all that before they vote on the budget and the rate schedule later tonight or at a later date.